G'day listeners and welcome to another episode of the Scouting Australia podcast, powered by Australian Property Scout Buyers Agency. I'm your host, Sammy Gordon, and today, guys, we have got a good episode, I think, that we've got lined up ready to dive into and unpack. I have back in the studio with me the silver doggy himself, Big Jimmy Ibrahim, mate. Welcome back.
G'day, Sammy. G'day, listeners. Good to be back up on the GC.
Good to have you
back.
back,
It's good
mate.
to be here.
Looks like you might have got a bit of a tan on the way out, a little bit of colour.
Yeah, on the 30-minute taxi ride, I've had one arm out, had the farmer's arm,
a bit average,
the truck driver's arm, got a bit of a tan. But I've flown up specifically for this episode, Sammy, because this would have to be
the most asked
question that's doing the rounds right now, and it's nothing other than, is now the right time to buy? Should I sit in the sidelines? Should I wait?
Should I buy now or should I wait?
What do you reckon?
Hey, it's a good episode. I think we should jump into it and get started.
Yes.
Mate,
I've got a whole bunch of things to ask you.
And it's funny because I know you and a few of the other boys are on the front line kind of taking the discovery calls and working through everything on that front. And it is one of the most often the biggest question that you guys say to me is this one. It's this one and it's the rent vesting, which I know we're tackling a couple other things around that coming up as well. But man, the should I buy now or should I wait is probably the most asked question. And I even got some guys that are like repeat buyers. They've bought a couple of deals with us and they're kind of, even they're getting a bit of fear from the market as well. And they're going, should I be doing this now or should I sit on the sidelines for 12, 24 months and just see what happens? So it's good, man. I want to see all the stuff you've kind of got unpacked. I've got a couple of things here, a couple of key points in my mind that spring up straight away. But mate, I know you wanted to ask me, yourself, all these questions. So mate, let's get started.
I do. And can I just preface this by saying, if you're actually asking that question, it's actually a good thing because having a little bit of caution about what you're going to do, a bit of awareness, so you don't just rush in blindly. So don't beat yourself up if you're not 100% sure. That's the whole idea. There is always going to be, I don't know about you, but you're probably a little bit different, but anytime you're looking to buy something, that little thing inside your mind goes, is it really the time? Like you sort of just the anticipation of spending the money, getting into a deal.
The difference that I have, I don't have that so much anymore because when I'm confident and bullish on an area, I'm always happy to just jump straight in and go for it when I'm very confident on it, right? But what I have that in some scenarios is when we're very early into a market, essentially like kind of trailblazing our way early into a market where no one else is and all the writing's on the wall and I can see it all from our perspective, all that digging and everything. I still get jitters getting in there, not so much for myself because I always start there and buy a couple of deals myself when we first enter an area, but putting clients' money in there, it can be the most nerve-wracking thing to do because we're obviously so committed to our investors having the best result, but getting in early can be an extremely nerve-wracking thing to do because the people aren't around, and it's almost like that herd mentality. It's being complete opposite of that. But obviously that's also where you can get your biggest wins. So I don't have it so much on this side, but I understand it because it's like, should I wait? Or, sometimes it's, should you wait for the green shoots or do you get in or do you, kind of get in now? So it's very kind of, I think, relevant to that side. I definitely, understand the feeling.
You did touch on something just very quickly there. And just to reiterate,
I told you not to touch me, mate.
For the listeners, you don't impress me very often, but you did impress me when you said...
That head is the most unimpressive thing I have ever seen in my life. You are a mongrel.
As I said, you don't impress me very often. However, you did impress me when you always said before I
always said it, so I obviously always impress you.
Well, you did say that you buy into a market before you put any investor in there.
Yes.
And I thought that is a classic example of don't do what I say, do what I do. And hats off to you because any market you do buy and you put your so-called little pebbles on the line there. And
I got pebbles, mate. You got grape seeds. You got grape seeds.
So
there's nothing in there.
You put them on the line in order to get the results. Then you have more confidence to put investors' money in there. And not a lot of people do that. Not a lot of your fellow colleagues would do that.
I don't have colleagues. There's I don't have competition, mate. We are who we are.
So in saying that, if you're listening, yes, having that little bit of anticipation is okay. But hopefully this list that we're going to run through will give you a bit more clarity as to whether or not you should be investing. And
one thing I'll say on that as well, and even before we dive in on this, it goes back a little to the point you just made there of essentially, long story short, I'll walk the walk, and I'll walk it before the clients get in there as well. And I think that's what I love, essentially about what we do and what I do with this, because I think it's I think it's just putting essentially, for want of a better term, putting the balls on the line before the clients do. And man, I think it's super important. I think it's a really important thing. And I think a lot of clients appreciate it as well.
Which we've spoken about this many times, but common themes, and you should hear these little tips constantly. It's because, we often say success is finding people that have already done what you're trying to do. So if this is a classic example, if you've already tested a market and you're getting the results, why wouldn't you just replicate that?
Yes.
So speaks for itself.
Mate, let's go for it.
Let's go for it. The big one that is hot on the lips of everybody in Australia is interest rates.
Yes.
So people are saying, interest rates, surely, Semi, come on. Interest rates are record. They're going through the roof. Yes, we might have a little reprieve here or there, but I don't trust the RBA. Surely now's not the right time. Interest rates, come on, mate. Come on.
Mate, the simple reality is we are either at or very, very close to the peak of the current interest rate cycle in our professional opinion. Inflation isn't fully curbed, but it is to an extent kind of being pulled under control. It is coming back. It isn't fully curbed, but the RBA has lifted their rates, I believe, to a position an amount that they think is going to help alleviate that and pull that inflationary number back down. They can't go much higher, if any higher, obviously due to the additional pressures on the economy and onto the everyday Australian as well. But the way I look at it is like, man, everyone was used to the good times when interest rates were super low, right? But now it's having a whinge when interest rates are back a little bit above long-term averages, which typically around about your 5%. Man, when I bought my first property making $30-something thousand a year, my interest rate was 7.19%. This is 15 years ago. I've been through worse than this before, and it's like a small window in that long-term picture, and that's where you got to look at this stuff. Like, yes, interest rates are annoyingly high at the moment compared to what we've been experiencing most recently. But I think the big thing that people have got to remember and drum back into themselves is interest rates were never going to stay that low. They were also at historic lows. The good times can't last forever. And man, if anything, I think it should be a precursor for people to realize what is possible when debt is fully reduced on a portfolio, because people got a very good feeling of that because it was, debt was almost at zero. People borrowing money in the 2%. You're literally almost at zero. So it should reiterate the fact of what debt reduction and high cash flow deals combined with debt reduction plays can do. But realistically, man, it is part of the journey that you're going to cop higher interest rates at certain points. I don't think we're going to be going much higher, if any, than where we are right now. But yeah, man, it's a small blip in the radar. And to put the journey off, because interest rates are a bit higher and you might cop a little bit negative, to put the journey off or to stall the journey in this environment, it's just like not the right call. It's not the right thing. So often I'll harp on and constantly drum in around the constant accumulation, the concept of constant accumulation. I believe it is the most powerful thing you can do in property, and literally probably in the investing world, because the constant accumulation, you're constantly recycling equity and buying again, Over time, your rents, I don't know about you, but I do know about you, because a lot of your deals that we did early in the piece, when we're buying hard and doing cash flow deals in Brizzy, we're buying 8-9% yields. Now they're 11, 12, 13% yields. So your rents have increased, even though your cost of debt has also increased. That has also picked up and helped alleviate a lot of that pressure from that front too. So, man, it is literally just part of the journey. I would never be stopping the journey purely because of an outside factor like that. It's just got to be managed and closely managed, and you just got to assess and look at your portfolio and make sure you can afford it. If you can't, what could you maybe put in that changes the game a little bit? But you always got to focus on that constant accumulation. That will make you wealthier than anything you'll do in your life.
And just taking that a little bit further, because you did mention negative gearing and people thinking, you know what, yeah, interest rates are a little bit high. Oh, Sammy always said, it's positively geared. Positive cash flow, but now I'm going to be negative. Come on. So people, the fear of negative gearing, people don't really understand that as well, do you think?
Especially people that are new. So people that have only been in the game for the last 2 or 3 years, they're used to very, very low interest rates. So they're completely used to positive cash flow. It's pretty hard to be away from positive cash flow when rates were so low. But realistically, we're at this point. All right, let's say something costing you $5,000 a year to hold, right? Then you write it off your tax. You get let's say you get 30, 40% of that back. So something that's costing you $5,000 a year might actually only be costing you, say, $3,000 a year.
Yeah.
It's $3,000 a year in the scheme of things. It's nothing, especially let's say you buy for good money. You make, let's say, $25,000 on the way in, and you get exceptional growth, or you get good growth, 10% growth in the first 12 months. That might be $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 on top of your 20-ish made on the way in. Mate, you're $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 up for the expense of a $3,000, $5,000 a year to hold. It's a no-brainer. And so many people fixate on that cost of what will cost me a year or a week. It's like literally $3,000 is $60 a week. Not even. It's nothing in the scheme of things. But imagine if over the course of the year, that's what that property produces. You pull it out, you do another one, you buy another one that compounds into that, plus rental growth. Mate, it's a no-brainer in my mind that it's part of the journey. And negative gearing, while it's not something I like, if it's something we need to bloody bite into at the moment and cop at the moment to still be able to build the portfolio, do it while other people are perturbed by that and not willing to invest because of that reason. Do it because other people aren't, because you'll be able to get better deals because there's less people in the market, even though stock is very, very tight. But also, if you're buying in the right locations, you're going to be getting that lift. And then when interest rates start coming back down, what you're going to find is all those people who are sitting on the sidelines waiting for those cash flows to work again are all going to come piling back in. They're going to be paying a premium because they're trying to play catch up, just trying to get in the game ASAP. That's just going to be so much better for you having bought in 12 months earlier than 18 months earlier than that event happening.
That's a really good point, Sammy. So, and a lot of people
think...
What
was that?
It's a very good point.
Thank you.
Very good point. You don't hear that very often.
3 already for the podcast. Yeah. 3 already. What are we, 11 minutes in?
Because some people do think interest rates control pricing. They're completely, they get confused on that, don't they?
Look, interest rates and the way they move, they can affect pricing. So you look at the last 12 months, 18 months, you look at your bigger markets that had a lot of fluctuation in terms of positive price movement during COVID. A lot of those came back. And that was a huge reason for it, is they got to very, very heady highs. Interest rates went up. A lot of people couldn't afford, so they were kind of cashing out and kind of going back down, right? Kind of force it back to a level of equilibrium. You look back a long way, and it isn't the only factor that caused that, but it is a factor that had an influence on the market. To say that it has no effect at all is ridiculous. You look at the early 2010s, 2012, 13, 14, when Sydney and Melbourne first started their cycles, what was happening at the same time? Interest rates were on a steady decline because obviously the government was moving to boost the economy again. It is not the only precursor, but yes, sometimes it can be the match that starts a run.
Okay, so I think we've dispelled interest rates. About why you should get into the market. Now, on the other side, what would you say about population growth and migration in terms of how that's affecting whether you should be buying now or not?
Oh, man, I think it's another huge thing. It's been all over the news for the last kind of 3-4 months or whatever around the population, the amount of internal migration, especially from overseas, that's coming in, and the Australian government over 2-3 years essentially combined with internal migration, right? Like already reproducing and whatnot in Australia. We're talking somewhere between 800, probably be maybe not that far off 1 million people in the next 3 years in terms of Australian population increasing. It's only going to provide, there's only going to be less housing for a higher number of people. That's just going to continue to put pressure on pricing. Again, sitting it out for the sake of it being a bit of an uncertain market, find the areas that are going to have positive price growth because of things like that, and it's going to keep running. You're going to get more of a gain than it's going to cost you for sitting on the sidelines.
Which leads perfectly into the next supply and demand in terms of stock levels, right? So talk to us a bit about that, about the supply and demand and the current stock levels, and why population growth essentially is just exacerbating that problem.
Well, I mean, we spoke about this just recently on a podcast, So we obviously went in depth. If you want to know in depth around, I guess stock levels, supply and demand, all the rest of it, we did do a podcast just recently on that and kind of breaking that down in depth. But man, like that's that is a huge thing at the moment that is causing quite strong price growth in a lot of. There's a couple of cities that are still performing quite well. There's a lot of regional areas that are starting their run or continuing their run right now. And it is due to the supply and demand imbalance that's in those markets right now. It doesn't stack up a lot of the time to actually build new homes in these areas because build prices have gone on such a crazy run. And it's so expensive to build in those locations now. A lot of those builds actually are no longer going through. So there's a lot of permits stalling and a lot of new builds stalling, which means no new supply coming into an area where a population might be increasing. So there's that increasing demand for property in the area with a dwindling supply, and that is obviously creating price growth through that friction.
And I know we've spoken about this before, but I find it really fascinating when we're talking to people and we talk about the lack of stock and the housing shortage, even before COVID, before migration all started kicking in. And now we've got 300,000 to 400,000 people. And you just ask the question, well, where do you think people are going to live?
Yeah.
I mean, and especially if they're not building any more housing, that's creating an exacerbate. It's like putting fuel on a fire.
Yeah, 100%.
So if you're going to hold off on that. And I remember you saying the housing crisis might not even appease, or they're saying, 2025, 2026?
Yeah, they're talking a good solid 3-4 years before the actual supply issues that are present in the current market before they fully come back under control. They're talking a good solid 3-4 years. We're talking 25, 26. And man, if you've got that much time to run, imagine sitting on the sidelines until things cool down again. Man, it's kind of like people who sat on the sidelines in COVID, but there was unbelievable opportunities. It's like COVID was a little bit different because it definitely felt like there was more risk in the air then, but it was still an uncertain time and an uncertain market. But it's kind of like sitting on the sidelines where there is a serious opportunity there. What you got to do, and my big opinion is, people who are nervous about this, should I buy now or should I wait? You've got to look at the downsides. Where are your downsides out there in the current market at the moment, and where can you mitigate risk? So if you're looking at areas that haven't had ridiculous growth, they haven't been going through a slide over the last couple of years, maybe the last 12 months, they haven't got those worrying signs that you should be wary of buying into a market. If they've got all the positives, then what is the upside for getting into these markets as well? Because if property investing is a big part of your journey, or if it is going to be your journey of wealth creation, then literally starting in a market like this, a lot of people make money, big money, in the times where it actually is quite hard to invest, and well, not quite hard to invest, but when it's an uncertain time to invest. When it's a confident time and everyone's confident of getting into the market, that's not the best time to do it. It's normally when there's the most competition. It's the hardest to get the best deal. You might be overpaying for something that's not a great property, and that obviously isn't the ideal scenario. What you are wanting to be doing is investing when less people are in the market and waiting for the time. It was something Steve Jobs said ages ago. It was years ago. It's if you're buying into something that's already kind of been through the wave, the exposure to actually have that great growth potential is so low. What you're wanting to be doing, and this is the way he always thought with his essential business plans and the way he set himself up, was really around positioning yourself before the wave. Yeah. And that's what I talk a lot about with clients. There's different ways of investing. We can catch something that's already on the way through, or we position ourselves before the wave comes through. And it kind of that point earlier about the uncertainty and being a little nervous about getting into markets before they go. Sometimes that's a bit of a ballsier move, but the upside potential is so much more. So, it will obviously take longer. You're getting in earlier, but the upside potential is so much bigger and it's essentially so much more compared to something that's already on its way through. It suits different people in different times. For some people, it's good to get in and catch a wave that's already going through. For other people, and especially sometimes diversification can come in. You buy two properties, you one that the wave's already coming through, and you get another one, position yourself nice and early and catch the whole thing.
Well, I think you tapped on a point there about the uncertainty in the market, because fear is so big.
It is.
And with fear, with your interest rates going up and you've got less money to spend and you're spending more potential money on housing or investments, it naturally gives you that fear. But what you're saying is looking at the trends and what happened in COVID and looking at all of these mentors that you're talking about, the time to invest is when there's the most fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
As long as it's a calculated decision and you're basing it on.
Calculated decision is the key point here. So calculated decision based on your current situation, your current situation where you're sitting right now. Like we're talking about before, something that might be $5,000 a year negative. Most people who run the budgets would 100% be able to afford that. I think 95% of people would have no issues affording that whatsoever. But you should also be diligent and run the numbers and make sure you can afford it. And if it literally would be 95, 98% of people would be able to afford that, no worries at all. And the upside that's there from a growth potential is 100% worth doing it. Good catch. And, but you've got to look at it from that front. And for that small percentage that don't have that ability, maybe they need to change tack, or maybe if they're doing an equity release to fund it, maybe they give themselves a 2-year buffer of equity release from that negative cash flow position to do it. It's not something I would normally recommend, but if it gets you into the market now, perfect. But if you scrape together something because you're on a super low income, and then anything you buy, you literally can't afford anything that's negative from that front. That being said though, if you scrape together a deposit, you're obviously saving. So if you're obviously saving, this is why I'm saying before, $50, $30, $50, $70 a week to hold something that's going to grow substantially in a 12-month window. To me, it's a no-brainer to make that call.
And I suppose if we were to flip that for people, because naturally...
Can I say one thing, actually? This just popped in my head for a second. Yeah. If I think back to 2009, when I bought my first property, that was 7.19%, right? Interest rate. And I lived in that thing initially, and I was bleeding on it because the interest rate was so high. And I was actually on P&I, just being young and not really understanding. Interest rate was so high, even when I leased it, paid 275. It was renting for 360 or 380 a week, something like that, which isn't the worst return. But the interest rates were so high, like I struggled to afford that. I nearly went under, but it was on P&I. But if I hadn't bought it, even though it was costing me that money, within 3 years, it had grown enough and I'd saved enough that I was able to pull it out and go into another deal. Interest rates had also come back down. When interest rates came back down, the market jumped by about 50K. That 50K allowed me to get into the second deal. Same thing though. I could barely afford to hold this thing. It was slightly negative. But when I combine those two deals together and you look at the growth that they had, say in 7 years from the first one, and it was about 4 years from the second one, they both doubled. So one went from 275 to 5, sold it at 525, made 250K. The other one went from 355 to almost 800,000, more than doubled in that time frame. Hadn't bought it, and really they probably weren't the right investments. You can still buy much better investments than what, especially the first one was. But if I had never done it, I would never be in the position I am now. And I think this is the thing. You mitigate your risks by buying something that's closer to something you can afford for sure, but making sure you're making money on the way in and it's going to keep growing. You know, that if I hadn't done those things, man, because it was negative, you know,
that's a good point.
I would never be where I am right now. Wouldn't be sitting at the table with you.
That's almost, well, if we couldn't be so lucky. If you actually went out and bought a positively geared property at that point, right? And let's just say you didn't get that growth, 100% you wouldn't be in this position, because people, when they're thinking about this,
but mate, interest rates was 7.19%.
I get that, but I'm just saying hypothetically. When people are thinking, you know what, I need to have something positively geared. And I'm like, well.
So they go buy on Broken Hill with a 9-10% yield.
Okay, but what if that market doesn't do anything, doesn't grow? Let's just say it stays flat, or even if it grows by 10 grand. Is that going to help you moving forward? No.
Yeah.
So if your game and you're trying to accumulate, you need to understand what your objective is. And I think you put it really well, is that growth, don't lose sight of the bigger picture when you're trying to save 3 grand.
Yeah, 100%, man. Couldn't agree more.
However, if you go on 30 grand negative or 20 grand negative, then that's when you should start thinking, oh, hold on a minute. Is this really putting me back or getting me into my next deal?
This is where I had a strategy session with a client who had bought with a blue chip expert buyer's agent.
Oh, look out, folks. Look out.
And it was running 8 grand a year or something negative at record low interest rates. Yeah. When they were in the twos.
Jeez.
And then and he said, man, what should I do? Like when interest rates started climbing up, and I said, what's the cash flows like? And he goes, I think it's running about 5 or 8 grand or whatever it was. And I go, that's as bad as I thought it was. I thought it would have been heaps worse than that. I said, you sure? And he goes, yeah. That was like last tax return. And I'm like, hang on. This was like 12 months on from when the interest rate run had happened. And I said, man, I think you should run them at current rates and see what that comes out at. He goes, yeah, I did, man. It came out of that. And I was just like, that doesn't sound right. So I pulled it up and I said, all right, just run me through these questions. Let's run me through these couple of things real quick. And I ran it all. I go, mate, you're running about you're almost at $28,000 a year negative. There is a reason why you can feel this thing bleeding you dry. Yeah. And he's like, holy shit, I didn't realize it was that bad. And he went through all his numbers and he had a little bit of growth out of this thing. I think about 150 and 3. It had a little COVID run where it was positioned. The market had come back a little bit, but he couldn't afford to hold something that was $30,000 a year negative. So he sold it out. Cleared the profit, and then bang, we're rolling into a couple of other deals. So,
nice.
But for him to hold that, he was hamstrung. He had no serviceability because his issue was he was stuck with serviceability. I go, all right, well, let's have a look what's in the portfolio. And yeah, man, this thing was just absolutely bleeding him dry. And serviceability was completely shot. Selling that, getting the cash back, getting some debt back, and we're able to keep moving forward.
So it's a really key point there, folks. Not to underestimate don't confuse the difference between losing 20 to 30K negative on a deal that's not going to get you into your next deal and potentially losing 3 to 5K on a negatively geared asset that will give you the opportunity to recycle equity and go again. Very important.
Yeah, man.
Okay, so on the flip side then, if interest rates have gone up, we understand what's happening there, but rents have increased as well, Sammy.
And rents are still increasing.
They are. So in terms of the return that you're going to get, let's talk about rental increases for a second and what they've done over the last probably couple of years.
Yeah, obviously, look, I don't know the exact number in terms of where most cities are sitting with like rental increases and whatnot as well. But I can tell from personal experience within my portfolio and our clients' portfolios, like most rents have been rising by 15 to 20% a year for the last 2-3 years. We used to have a ballpark. I remember when we used to do even just grannies. It was always a really easy thing to work on because grannies almost always rent for exactly the same because the product's almost exactly the same in the same city, right? And they used to sit around kind of like 330 to 340 a week. And now consistently they are at like 410, 420 a week for the exact same product, like 2 years on. So it's funny, man, like even doing those deals and I know we had chat about building and increasing and all the rest of sort of stuff like that. But it's a funny thing because, you know, a lot of the time, by the time all that kind of gets through, you also have had that rental price increase as well. On a lot of those areas where the grannies moved by that amount, the houses have moved by substantially more. The houses used to be renting for $350, now they're at $500. You know, and it's just like, yeah, it's a cost of doing business has gone up, but you got to remember that applies additional pressure to the housing market, which is a direct reflection. And there's also that huge shortage we were talking about before, direct reflection and correlation on rental growth and it pushing through as well in the right areas, obviously. But yeah, man, the rental growth we've seen. Hence why, like, you look at the yield that you have on your portfolio on original purchase prices. Yeah, that's what we were talking before, around like 8% sort of money that we were sitting at. Yield, sorry. You're sitting around about that 8%, but now you're sitting across the portfolio typically around about 11, 12, some of the deals 13%. That is rental growth. You know, and so like that coming through, you think about something moving from 8% to 12%, that's a 50% rental increase for that yield to go from 8 to 12. So man, like, we've seen that across a lot of our investors' boards. And I think that's what you got to remember and look at as well, is like that coming in, that in a very short time frame as well, a very short window, that is also something that a lot of people got to look at. They're just looking at, oh, well, okay, well, interest rates are at this. Well, this is how much it's going to cost you. They're not really factoring that in, because we don't factor that in, because that's obviously just cream on top if it happens. But it's one of those things that, mate, it's 100% coming. We've been experienced for the last few years now. I think it's going to continue until the housing shortage eases, and then I think it'll calm down a little. But yeah, man, it's not gonna cool off anytime soon.
Just with rents and people listening thinking, you know, yeah, it's great, rents have increased. Is there a point, I mean, going back to, and I'm assuming you're going to talk about supply and demand, but have you noticed in any time that you've invested that the rents have pulled back in any of the markets you've been buying in?
There was some of the Sydney markets that I own in are kind of like Sydney fringe. And so when they were at the peak in COVID, they went crazy. Like the rents on those spiked by like $300 a week. They have come back about $100 a week since those, but they were rental driven. So that area just went wild because of COVID. House prices went from, 750 to 1.2 mil. Like it went from a crazy run. And then rents went from probably like, 600 to 850, 900. And they've kind of pulled back by about $100 a week off the back of that as well. So, but again, that was like an external influence. That was kind of like, I already owned property in those areas. I hadn't done it I had ridden them through previous booms. I wasn't doing them for trying to time like a COVID wave or something. Yeah. It was just a benefit of when I was there at the time. It's almost like a little mining blip where you're in some remote mining town and the thing goes crazy because a big employer moves into the area, and then 5 years later they're gone. It turns back into a ghost town. Yeah. It's obviously not to that extreme, but it's when COVID waves happen, a lot of these regional areas, huge migrational increase purely from, say, like this was Sydney siders moving south, getting out of the Sydney, being out of the actual metro postcodes. Yep. And then when that eased off, a lot of them stayed, but a lot of them kind of came back. It just kind of dissipated that initial vacancy, the vacancy
supply
rate.
And demand, right?
This is exactly it, supply and demand. But vacancy rate in that area in the peak of COVID was at 0%. You could literally throw almost anything you wanted on a rental and you'd get it. And now it's come back to a much more of an equilibrium state. But
in the markets we're buying in, though, at an Australian Property Scout,
of course,
buying in,
just giving some examples around that as well.
For sure. Do you feel that based on supply and demand, rents are going to continue to be solid and continue to increase? Yeah. And if interest rates do pull back, then if you've made a short-sighted view on buying now, thinking interest rates are too high, but you're not factoring in rent's going to continue, and when the interest rates do pull back, you're winning.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So do you feel that the rents in the markets that you're buying in still are going to continue to perform really well?
I do. So what will happen, right, is when that time comes where interest rates do start to come back a bit and people get more confidence, they start piling in, you got to remember, we're not just talking about investors. We're also talking about owner-occupiers. The issue will be that there is going to be a shortage. There will have been a shortage of housing actually coming in. So just because they drop the interest rates doesn't mean all of a sudden all this new housing is going to appear. The housing pipeline is still going to be very slow and constricted, right? But what will happen is all these new people will come smashing into the market. People will be trying to buy up stock, and that's going to continue to, especially homeowners, buying up rentals. If they're buying up rental stock, it's going to deplete supply even more. From a rental perspective, and that will keep serious pressure on rents and keep pushing it through. So I don't think, in your correct areas, especially the areas that weren't driven by, say, COVID booms, I think they're going to keep, especially from a rental perspective, keep pushing pretty hard in the foreseeable future.
Okay. You touched on the different markets and so forth. Now, there's a big misconception when people talk about the Australian property market or Sydney or Brisbane or Melbourne. Is it looking at if now's the right time to invest, understanding that there are thousands of different markets and sub-markets. So can you just run us through that about when people should be thinking, if they're thinking they live in Sydney and they're like, nah, Sydney's coming back because they're just thinking of Sydney as a macro market, understanding that there are so many different micro markets, and that's the kind of focus that you have.
Yeah, so like obviously you've always got to have kind of that like Australia-wide view and like kind of like a real macro view, and then you hone in into your micro markets that have everything stacking up on them. So, man, I would definitely be honing. There's a lot of other locations to really be looking at and honing in on and doing more deep dive research into, which is obviously what our clients pay us for. And then man, we really just do that, get in on the ground, and then find the areas that are legitimately still going to continue booming, and we have done very well at that because the majority of the country has kind of slid, especially from like 2022, started 2022 when interest rates first started running. Most markets had stagnated and started sliding after that point. Most of our investors are probably up on average 25-30% in the past 12 months. And that's bank vals, literally bank val increases in that time frame.
And that is as interest rates have increased. How many times? So the last probably 10, 12,
12, 13 rises.
So in saying that, Sammy, looking ahead, if people are thinking is now the right time to invest, and with interest rates the way they are, and let's just say they continue to grow, you're saying that the markets that you're buying in are going to continue to grow in the next period of time, in the next 12 months.
I'm still extremely bullish, man. Like you look at the thing we spoke about right at the start of this was walking the walk, right? Walking the talk, or whatever the hell it is. Man, I'm still buying. I wouldn't still be buying if I thought areas were going to come off the boil, they're going to plateau, or they weren't going to keep increasing. I don't, what's the point of investing if that isn't going to be there? I'm literally still putting my money into the market consistently, man. This is the thing, right? I always talk about continual accumulation, continual accumulation, because there is always somewhere worth investing in, and that's the huge thing. Anyone wants to sit in the sidelines, I don't think it's the right time to invest. There is always somewhere that's the right time to invest. I guarantee you that. You have a look at the last 130 years. I guarantee you had a look at that. Does not matter what happened in that year. There will be a year where somewhere has produced minimum 10%. There will be 100% every year, a market that has done 10, maybe 20% plus every single year, no matter what happens. Sydney may have had a huge fall. Somewhere else may have had a huge fall. But then, there's always somewhere performing and somewhere worth investing, putting your money into that's still going to keep growing. So I think that's the most important thing, man, is like really taking this thing from a long-term view, not looking at the short term, looking at the long term and going, all right, I can afford to invest right now. If a deal is $3,000 a year, $4,000 or $5,000 a year negative, I can afford to hold that thing for the long-term game, and especially even for the next 12, 24-month gain in that period. And I think that's the most important thing, man, that continual accumulation. You cannot get away from that. You do that, and you do that consistently, continual accumulation. What is your goal? What do you need to pick up every year until you hit the portfolio size that you need? If you do that and you can keep doing that, that is what's going to move the needle. That's what's going to get you there. Because when you sit in the sidelines for 12 months almost always turns into 18 to 24 months at least, because you don't just all of a sudden go, oh, yep, it's 12 months, I'm going to buy a deal. There's so many things involved with it. If you're continually picking up and accumulating in that size, your portfolio continues to grow. That compounding growth, it's unbeatable.
And is it fair to say, this next point, what else are you going to do with your money? Like, what else is your money doing? If you've got the equity or the cash,
literally, if you sit $100,000 in an offset account against the primary residence or against something, to offset 6% interest rate and save yourself $6,000 a year in interest, all you need to make is $6,000, $7,000, $12,000, and you've doubled what you would have saved on but like $12,000 is nothing. You pick the right, you buy $20,000 below, you buy $18,000 below market, you have 3 extra money, you get another $18,000 in growth that year, which is nothing. $18,000 on that, you've 6x your money. The return, that compound, that leverage return is so much higher from that standpoint.
And speaking about leverage, I mean, some people might say, you know what, I'm going to put into an ETF, into shares and so forth. And obviously we're not here giving financial advice, but just looking at leverage. And you brought up a really good example in one of our other episodes that on a 20% return on, if you invested that $100,000, you got 20% return, you're at 120.
Yeah.
Whereas if you let's just say you bought a property for $100,000, the same 20% return gives you, let's say we buy $500,000.
You bought a $500,000 with $100,000 deposit. Yeah.
We've got $100,000 cash on cash return from leverage.
Yeah, with the 20%. Yeah, if you're getting the same 20% return. Yeah. It's so much further because of leverage. That's why it makes it an unbeatable asset class.
Especially when you're starting out, right? If you're looking to leverage and you don't have a huge capital, by sitting it in shares, and I do like shares, but when you look at that example, how do you? It's pretty hard to argue with it.
You can't argue. You can't compete with it.
No. Okay. Well, and that leads me to actually, what about people that are out there and their loan is still fixed in the low twos and under 3% or whatever, and they're saying, "Nah, Sammy, now's not the right time. I'm going to hold. I'm going to ride this out and milk the 2% until next year." What do you say?
Why don't they still invest?
I'm just saying, if they don't want to break their loan, or if they have to refinance,
just get equity release on top.
So can you just run people through that?
Yeah, no worries. So let's say they got available equity in the portfolio that they or in their primary residence that they can access and pull out. You just get an equity release on top of that. So there's $100,000, $200,000 worth of usable equity in it. You just do an equity release on top as a separate top-up loan. You don't touch the existing loan. It's a separate top-up loan. It would have to be with the same lender. But yeah, man, you just pull that back out and put that to work.
So again, the key here is if it's with the same lender, the top-up loan would be at the standard new rate, but the existing rate would stay the same.
Yeah.
What if the current lender wouldn't lend any money to you and you had to refinance that, and that was the only option?
And they don't have any other cash?
No.
Oh, well, that's a personal decision. I would be running the numbers and seeing like how much are you actually saving hanging on to it. Probably if it's a primary residence and it's a half decent, if it's a significant size loan, it probably is a fair bit. Most people probably wouldn't feel comfortable. They probably want to hang on for 12 months and ride the rest of that thing out. And realistically, I don't really have an issue with that. If it's something that someone wants to do, it's a personal decision. It's primary residence. But like if you were able to pull out $200,000 and put that into 2 deals, and man, even if you made a 10% gain on 2 deals at 500 and you made 20 grand on the way into them, make $70,000 per deal. You've made 140 as opposed to maybe saving 10, 15 grand in interest.
It's a no-brainer.
This is where the leverage side of things comes in. It's just like it's an untouchable scenario, you know, and you could run almost any scenario there through. As long as you're buying the right area and you get that return, then it's worth doing. And guys, that is the risk in investing. It isn't always guaranteed, but especially if you use the right people, you're buying the right areas, you buy at the right money and make a margin on the way in, you're stacking the deck. You know, you're stacking the deck with as many reasons why you should win as possible. If you go on a loan, and especially if you're doing something silly like buying locally, I was going to buy another something local or something, like you're setting yourself up to fail. But if you stack the deck to win and you do these right calls to win, and you put those irons in the fire, then you've got the highest chance of success possible.
Mate, you've done exceptionally well. The last one I've got one more for you.
He's got one more.
Is just around your circle of influence. You're listening to Macca down at the pub.
You love the circle.
What about your old man?
Maccas.
Your old man saying, "Nah, son, don't do it." Nah, haven't you seen interest rates? Albo's not going to bring them down.
Albo's got nothing to do with it.
I know, that's what they're saying. They blame the Prime Minister for everything.
Yeah.
So the people around you... The people around you, and just being mindful of what those conversations are, because that can be a reason why you wouldn't invest, and understanding how much of an influence that could have.
Yeah, I mean, I typically don't take too much. I actually haven't for
I know you haven't. You don't listen to anyone.
Yeah, I don't.
No, we all know that. But in terms of the people listening out there who are they don't have as much confidence as you, and they do take advice or listen to their friends or family or their parents.
Look, it always comes back to like, have they done what you want to do? Have they literally done what you want to do? And if they haven't, they aren't the right people to be taking advice from. As for every single person out there, it's always it's not financial advice. You should be assessing your own financial position and seeing if it's the right thing for you. If it's the right thing for you, I think I personally would be doing it and think people should be doing it. And for bloody circle of influence, if they're not the right people, if they're the ones telling you no, don't do it because of all these things, it's like. The right circle of influence would be like, have you assessed, I'll be looking at us as a circle of influence of assessing I'm not saying 100% go out there and do it. I'm saying assess your current position. Do you have the risk appetite to do it? Do you have the financial ability to do it? Do you want to have a crack at it? And it's kind of stacking all those things or like assessing all those things. It's either going to be a yes or it's going to be a no. And then you just make the decision and move forward from there. So, mate, I think that's as simple as it is. I've got 2 key points. My 2 big key takeaways from this, you hit me with all the standard stuff that we always run through and all the good stuff that comes to making, really, that's just all about making the right decision and purchasing the right asset. But really, for me, it comes down to 2 things. If you're not willing to spend $5,000 a year at the moment in the current interest rates to make 20 grand on the way into something on the way in, and let's say $40,000 a year in growth, just from a 10% growth rate, making a 20 grand margin. If you're not willing to spend 5,000 to make 60, you're an idiot. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like $5,000 to make 60. If that's your argument, if that's your only argument, because of a little bit of negative gearing while interest rates are at their peak, so you can get in the market early and make that win while everyone else is sitting on the sidelines, you know, doing their thing. Yeah. Level 1 investor, go back to it, you know? Like that's literally my thing. If you can afford to do it and your position allows, I think you should be doing it on that front for that, you know, for that reason. If you've got all the other things we're talking about that are actual things you got to assess, then whatever, it is what it is. You've got to assess those things to bring them into it. But if that is the limiting factor, that you're not going to do it because of a $5,000 deficit that you can write off and all the rest of it in exchange for that, then I don't think, you know, I think it's a shit argument. I don't think that's the right thing. The other thing, if you are serious about this journey and serious about this accumulation process and building your portfolio the way that we've been talking about here, continual accumulation is the key. That compounding growth is the key. So that's the most important thing. If you look at that, continual accumulation, key. $5,000 a year that we're going to cop. All right, I'm going to cop $5,000 a year, but I'm going to make 60 on this at the end of this year, and I'm going to pull that equity out and I'm going to buy another one. And even if it's $5,000 a year and we've got combined $10,000 a year loss, I'll write that off. Get $4,000 or $5,000 of that back. You got depreciation on top as well, which I didn't even go into. Could be even more that you're getting back on that as well. But then we're going to compound it and build it. We're going to stick to this plan of continual accumulation because this is our business plan for wealth through property, and I'm going to stick to it. You know, people wonder why they get lost, they get sidetracked, and people don't hit their 10 properties. They get stuck at 1 property or 2 properties because they don't stick to the simple things. They don't block out the noise. They let Macca and Jimmy down at the pub talk shit and not do it. If you follow this stuff and do this stuff correctly, you get a result. Guarantee you get a result.
There you have it, folks.
I think that's all we need to say.
It's taken him 40 minutes to really roll himself up.
Take me 40 minutes to wait for you to shut up so I get to say the 2 key points and go to lunch.
He's left his best stuff to the end, folks. And you started weak, but you finished strong.
Started strong, listening to you for 40 minutes, finished strong. Now we're going to go get a beer.
So just to be clear,
oh God,
are prices going up?
Oh God. Can someone please send me an axe to put through this bike? Listeners,
I'm still
thank
not sure.
you very much for tuning in. Jimmy's down at the pub. He's with Macca. He's with the other
Jono.
Jimmy. And
Jono.
No.
There's always a Jono at the pub.
Always a Jono.
Macca, Jono, Billy.
Anon. Is Anon there?
Anon Smith.
Oh, mate. Anyway, thank you, listeners, for tuning in once again to today's episode of Should I Buy Now or Should I Wait? Jimmy, kind of thanks for coming up. You're a bit annoying, but
mate, I threw a few jabs at you, and your head's that big. I thought I couldn't miss, but you've actually dodged them all, and well done.
They call me Ali with the dips and the weaves.
You did well.
Anyway, mate, I appreciate you coming in. It was good to dive into this. I hope a lot of listeners got a bit of value out of this. I know there's a lot of people being a little bit concerned and sitting on the sidelines about this. I hope it allayed some fears or kind of made you think about what you should be looking at when you're really assessing your situations. And I understand it can be a little bit stressful, especially when you're getting started. But just remember, the business plan is the kind of that roadmap to your wealth. You know, it's the roadmap to your wealth through property. So stick to it. If you can afford to stick to it, then do it. Obviously, assess each current individual circumstance. If you need financial advice, go out and seek that before making any decisions. But as always, absolute pleasure jumping in and joining us. If you know anyone that is sitting on the sidelines, or maybe you've been sitting on the sidelines and someone else been harping on about this to you as well, maybe flick them the podcast. I would appreciate it massively. We want to keep building this community of people that are thinking in exact same way as us, thinking, speaking, and doing the same way as us. Taking action is the most important part. If you could please send it on, it would be massively appreciated. For the rest of you that haven't left us a 5-star review,
there's a few.
There's only a couple, mate. We're up at about 300
What do you
reviews.
think of people that haven't left a 5-star review?
I've been very vocal in how I feel about them. I don't need to keep throwing much around, mate, but I would appreciate it massively if people out there are enjoying it. We love it. I think we're about 270 5-star reviews right now.
Jeez.
Just on Spotify. I think there's about another 100, 150 on Apple. Thank you very much, guys. We massively appreciate it. I'm Sammy. He's Jimmy. He's Mingen. We'll be back next week for another episode of the Scouting Australia podcast.